Hi, everybody. It's Aaron. Okay. Apologies for not being able to make it yesterday, but things are looking a bit better now. Obviously not ideal that we couldn't meet for our final day before the final test, but thankfully, with the wonders of technology, I'm able to record this so that you still get the lovely content and see my face. So remember that this is our last article. I'll say something about the final test at the end of this lecture. The article is already online. And remember, we're in Unit 4, which is on happiness. And I'm going to start with this quote, "May you get what you wish for." And we might think that that's a lovely thing, but some say this is actually a curse, right? That you get what you wish for. And this can mean many things, but the basic idea is that we think what we wish will make us happy. Will it make us happy? Will it make us as happy as we think? And this speaks to the title of this article, written by this gentleman here, Dan Gilbert. The title of the article, and it is a long article, but I do recommend that you read it if you get the chance, called "The Futile Pursuit of Happiness." And the key word here is futile, which means something like pointless or meaningless or um, fruitless. In other words, um, we all pursue various things because it'll make us happy, but maybe we have very little understanding of what will make us happy and how much. And so that is the focus of this final article in our course. Some very thought-provoking examples. This is the outline of the PowerPoint of what I'll talk about in our short session today. So the brain as an experience simulator, what is affective forecasting, what is impact bias as an example of affective forecasting, what is the empathy gap as an example of affective forecasting, and then finally, we'll discuss, are there any pursuits that are not meaningless or not pointless? I'm going to define everything in bold and underlined here as we go. And for our final test, you should have a good understanding of all of these concepts in bold. Okay, so the first idea is that our brains are experience simulators. Simulators are, we often think of simulations as something that happens with computers or with AI or virtual reality. Virtual reality simulates reality. But interestingly, you think about it, our brains also simulate reality or simulate experiences. And my example of here is right now, if I asked you, how would hot sauce taste on my piece of chocolate cake? Hot sauce, like peppery, spicy sauce. It would taste, I hope for many of you, it would taste disgusting put on chocolate cake. But you can simulate that taste in your mind right now just by thinking about it. Or if I said, um, imagine right now how it would feel and look and smell to be in Asia somewhere on the back of an elephant walking along. Many of you may not have had that experience before, so you're not remembering a past experience, but you are simulating it in your mind, what it would be like for you to do that. So our brains can do this, and this is a very special, unique thing that we can do. And as we're going to see, as we apply this to happiness and to motivations for doing things, this ability of our brains is very central to that. Okay, This first concept I want you all to think about. It's called affective forecasting. What does forecasting mean? Well, we often see this word in the context of weather, prediction. So tomorrow, the forecast is for rain. So it's a similar idea here, prediction in the future. And then the word affect here means something like feeling or emotion. So to affective forecasting is when all of us do this, when we decide on doing something or course of action. And part of the reason we do that is we are predicting how something will make us feel. Now, this is just something that we do all the time because, again, it helps us to decide what we should do. Let's say you're thinking about dinner for that night. Should you order a pizza? Should you make a homemade dinner? And in determining what to do, you're thinking about, well, how will it make me feel? And this is both short-term and long-term. A pizza would be nice. It's convenient. I don't have to do anything. It'll taste good, but it's expensive and it's not as healthy. If I made dinner from home, it's cheaper. It's more time consuming, won't taste as good. And all of these have to do with how you will feel. And so you're predicting how you're going to feel. Like it'll make me ultimately more happy to make homemade dinner. And importantly, this is neutral, right? We do this for good things, we do this for bad things. This is part of how we decide what we're going to do. And I have another example here, attending class. Let's say if we had like an 8 a.m. class or hitting the snooze button. You're lying in bed, you're thinking, well, it would be really nice in the short term to just hit snooze, roll over, fall back asleep. But maybe in the long term, it won't make me as happy because I won't know what's on the test, or I'll need to go find the notes from somewhere. So I'll be happier ultimately if I get up and attend class. So I've given a couple of examples, but we do this all the time in determining what to do, how to act. The purpose of this article, however, is to say that there are some times that we make predictions about what will make us happy where we're wrong or misguided. And to that end, I have a question for all of you to think about, which is this. Which would you rather? In other words, what would make you happier? Would it be to win the lottery, $10 million, yay, or to lose your arm? Which one would make you happier? Sometimes students misunderstand this and they think the or is an and. In other words, I win the lottery, but I lose my arm versus nothing. I don't mean that at all. I mean, win the lottery, yay, the lottery, all this money, versus lose an arm. No, I lost my arm. That's going to be very annoying. Now, I've set this up so that hopefully the vast majority of you will choose the lottery versus an arm. And to be honest with you, I join you in that as well. Okay, but just keep this in mind. This is a very extreme example. I'll come back to it in a second and I'll say more about it. Okay, so if you remember, affective forecasting is something that we do all the time, but now we're going to look at two examples that Gilbert discusses in his article of where we kind of go wrong in our predictions of how something will make us feel. The first one is called impact bias, and I definitely want you to really understand this for the final test. So, what is this concept? By bias, we mean a mistake or an error. Okay, so not accurate. And impact, we mean two senses here. because it's like the effect, but two ways. Impact can mean intensity and also length. So the length of time. So, how much something will make you happy, intensity, and also for how long it'll make you happy, length. And the claim is, or the definition of this concept is that we have a tendency to misjudge or mispredict, make a mistake about how deeply something will make us happy and how long it will make us happy. I always like to think of examples from my own life to illustrate this. And the example I like to tell the most is my experience with laser eye surgery. So I was one of those people who, as a child, I needed glasses. I had glasses, very thick glasses, and I had them throughout my entire childhood, teenage years, all the way up until I was 25. I didn't enjoy having glasses. I was one of those kids who would lose their glasses, or the glasses would break, or if I was doing something athletic like playing basketball or soccer, they might get crooked, and it was just overall very annoying to have glasses. And in my mid-20s, my parents very graciously offered to pay for laser eye surgery. And before I got it done, I predicted, like in my mind, I thought it's going to make me really, really, really happy, so intensity, for a really, really long time. And so I got it done. And indeed, I was very happy. And I would say for, day after day, week after week, there wasn't a day would go by where I wouldn't notice it. Like, oh, I don't need to wear glasses, or oh, I'm in the shower and I can see my body, or oh, I can wear shades, when it's sunny out. And there was all these things I would notice every day about how pleasurable it was to not have to wear glasses anymore. But after like 2 months or 2.5 months, and I was talking to my mother on the phone, because remember, they live further away. And she's like, oh, how's the laser eye surgery? How's it going? And it stopped me because I realized at that moment that I had not thought about my eyes in about a week. In other words, after 7 weeks of noticing every day and getting lots of pleasure every day from the fact that I didn't have to wear glasses, I hadn't thought about it in a week. And if I'm not thinking about something, then it's not giving you any obvious pleasure. It's just kind of invisible in the background. And what had happened is I had gotten used to it. And once you get used to something, it doesn't give you the obvious pleasure that we think about. And this was it was very obvious to me that I had misjudged how long I would be happy, or how long having laser eye surgery would give me pleasure. I thought it would give me pleasure for years and years and years. But after 6, 7 weeks, I got used to it. And once you get used to it, you're not thinking about it, it's not really giving you any obvious pleasure. So this would be a really good example of me with impact bias. And I mean, there's lots of other examples that I'm sure we can all think about. Maybe a lot of your own thinking could be, once I finish Humber and get a good job, then I'll be happy. And I'll be really happy, and I'll be happy for the rest of my life. But of course, part of us probably understands, if we've done a bit of that, you may finish Humber and you may get that good job, and then maybe for, a few months or however long, you'll get pleasure from this, but then eventually you'll adjust, you'll get used to it. And then you'll be like, what next? So that could be another example of impact bias. Or to go back to last week, we talked about romantic love. Some of you might think, once I meet the person who I fall in love with, then I'll be happy forever. And again, this could be another example of impact bias, right? Where you'll get used to it, and then it won't give you as much pleasure as you thought. You thought you'd be happy, really, really happy forever. And in fact, it's only for, I think we said infatuation lasts 18 months to 3 years maximum. So after that, so that would be an example of impact bias as well. Okay, I'm going to give two examples of examples that are discussed in the article that are more specific, but keep all these in mind as we go through it. Okay, one example of impact bias is that we think, wrongly, that more choice equals more happiness. So we can think of this in a lot of different ways. Think about if you go to the movie theater and there's only one film available versus if there's 10 films available. Well, it's better if there's 10 because then you can really decide which one will give you more pleasure. Or you go to the clothing store and there's one shirt versus another store, there's 10 shirts. More choice, I'm more likely to be happy. However, there is some evidence to suggest that this equation that we all believe is not true. That more choice does not necessarily mean more happiness. And one of the examples or counterexamples to this is a photography class. So in this photography class at a university, they divided the students into two groups at the end of the course. And the first group could choose any photograph that they'd taken. They'd taken thousands of photographs in this class. To choose one that is your favorite that you want to keep as a memory of this class. And that's final. The other group, choose your favorite photograph that you want to keep as a memento. But a week from now, you are allowed to come back and exchange this photograph for something else. In other words, the second group had more choice. They could make a decision, go home, trial run it, think about it for, a week, and then maybe I don't like this one as much. Maybe I really wanted the other one. They go back and they can exchange it. So if it was true that more choice equals more happiness, then the second group should be ultimately more satisfied with their decision, but that was untrue. The first group, the group that had to make a choice and it was final, they were the one who were more satisfied ultimately with their choice, which is interesting. I was talking to a friend about this last week as I was thinking about that we're teaching this, and they were talking a bit about how this could a little bit be true as applied to online dating. And what they mean by that is before online dating, right, before all of these apps, you meet someone. It was more rare to meet someone, and you might actually invest a lot more time and energy into seeing if there's a connection. Whereas now, because we are in some sense overwhelmed with choice, or people are overwhelmed with choice, that you're much more likely to not invest as much time and energy into a particular person. It's like you go out for coffee with one person, didn't vibe it as much, okay, move on. So in that sense, you might say, but I mean, maybe we were more satisfied before. Anyway, it's just something to think about. Okay. Example number 2 of impact bias. Many of us believe that big tragedies cause more suffering than minor annoyances. In other words, you're going to get more displeasure from breaking your leg versus if you have a pulled hamstring. But that's not true. And the basic idea is that big tragedies trigger our coping mechanisms. We are called to act and to take care of everything. So you break your leg, you go to the hospital, you get a cast, you get the x-ray, it's annoying, whatever, you begin to rehabilitate, right? And that's what you're focused on. Whereas with a pulled hamstring, a nagging injury, it's not so severe that you're motivated to do anything about it. It just lingers far longer than the leg, so that overall the nagging injury causes more suffering. Another example of this is, let's say you go home and your roof has a horrible leak, like it's just water's coming in, it's raining, and you are immediately on the phone to your landlord or to a company to come fix this leak, right? This is a big event, right? You need to act. Versus you come home and your door needs to be oiled. It's very creaky. It makes that squeaky noise whenever you open it and close it. And every time you open it and close it, it annoys you, right? Like that noise. But it's not so serious that you are going to oil it or fix it or whatever. And so it goes on for many months. So the claim is that overall, this creaky door that annoys you is going to cause more displeasure than the leaky ceiling, because the leaky ceiling is so serious that it calls you to act. So the paradoxical or surprising claim is that often small annoyances or inconveniences can cause more overall suffering than bigger tragedies, which is interesting and goes against how a lot of us would automatically think. And I would encourage you to think of your own example of this. Now, remember a few slides ago, I was talking about winning the lottery or losing your arm, and how, including me, all of us would say, oh, win the lottery. Well, they've done research on this, and in fact, surprisingly, shockingly, the actual answer is it makes no difference. What does that mean? Basically, after 1 year of winning the lottery, yay, I'm so happy, or losing a limb, oh, I'm so sad, you will return to your pre-lottery or pre-injury state of happiness. In other words, you get used to it, you adjust. So let's say, for example, that you were someone who was already kind of an unhappy person. You win the lottery, you're happy, but within a year you return to your level of your who you are, which is like someone who's kind of unhappy. Or let's say you're a happy person just by nature, and then this tragedy happens, right? You lose your arm, you're very sad. Within a year, you will have adjusted. You will return to your pre-injury state of happiness. So how is this an example of impact bias? I think a lot of us would say, oh, you won the lottery, you'll be really happy for a really long time, longer than a year. But within a year, you'll have adjusted. Or let's say something like you lose your leg or something. You think you'll be really unhappy for a long time, but within a year, you adjust. So again, this is an example of impact bias, right? Is that we misjudge how long something will make us happy. And one good thing about this example, because specifically the having like losing a limb, is that impact bias is true both for good stuff and for bad stuff. So let's say that you're in a romantic relationship and it ends poorly and your heart's broken, you get your heart broken, and you really do feel like, I will never get over this, I will be unhappy forever. That's impact bias, because the reality is that you will get used to it, you will move on, you will adjust. And so you're mispredicting how long and how intense your unhappiness will be. So impact bias it goes both ways. All right. This is the second example of affective forecasting where we get it wrong. And it's known as the empathy gap. Empathy gap meaning the space, and empathy meaning how we feel for another. But here the other is just us. And this concept depends upon understanding that we have at least two psychological states, what are known as hot states and cold states. Hot states are when we are feeling impulsive and emotional, governed by intense feelings. Cold states are when we are very calculative, very mathematical, very rational. And all of us going back and forth between these different states. And the claim is that when you are in a cold state, it is very difficult for you to accurately predict how you will act when you are in a hot state, and vice versa. So when you're in a hot state, it's very hard to predict how you will act in a cold state. And there's two really interesting examples that we are going to give here. I'm not going to play this song, but click on the video and you can see it. It's a very funny song. I don't know, funky song. It's a song. Okay. Now, this is actually from the text, so I'm not making this up. This is has been studied. So imagine we were in class right now, our final class, and I came in and I said, okay, and I played the song, and I say, if any one of you in this class is willing in a week before the final test to come up in front of everybody, and I'll play the song, and you have to dance by yourself expressively, dramatically for the full 3.5 minutes in front of everybody, I will give you 100% on the final test, and you do not need to write it. Some of you might be like in a cold state right now, right? Rational, calculative. And you might think, wow, all I have to do is embarrass myself for 3 minutes and I get an A and I don't need to study for it. So you raise your hand and you volunteer. I will dance. I'm into it. Fast forward a week. Now it's the time to do it. I come into class. I say, all right, come up here. It's time for you to, embarrass yourself for 3 minutes. Now you are in a hot state because now you're nervous. I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want everyone looking at me. I don't want everyone to laugh at me. And so now it's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'll just write the test. And so the idea here again is now you're in a hot state. So a week ago you were in a cold state. You committed to doing it. Now you're in a hot state, and now you don't want to do it. This actually, a variation of this actually happened to me in my life. I remember in high school, we were doing Shakespeare, and our teacher said, if anyone wants to perform a Shakespearean soliloquy, to be or not to be, in front of the class, they get 5 extra marks on their final mark of the course. And I'd say there's 40 students in the class, like 10 of us, including me, we raised our hand, like we will do it. So I memorized it, but because I was like 5 marks, 5 free marks, unbelievable. But then it came to the day to perform, and say of the 10 people who had volunteered a week before, or I think it was 2 weeks before, only 2 people actually presented. And maybe some of it was because people hadn't actually memorized it, but I think others were because people's like, I don't want to get up in front of everyone and say this. I don't want to be embarrassed. So I think this is interesting as an example. Okay, so another example of empathy gap. Unprotected sex. So what do we mean by this? Here we mean sex without contraception. So let's say that you're walking around Humber like after class or before class. You're thinking about your school and work and whatever. And then there's just people doing some research. And so they're asking students, they're asking people, and they're saying, okay, let's say you meet someone, you go out for a few times, and you want to have sex with them. Is it a good idea to use protection? And something like 90% of people or 95% of people will be like, yes, good idea. Okay, fine. But we know that in similar situations, it's not 95% of the time that people use protection. It's something like 55% of the time. So what happened to that 40%? Well, the idea is that when you are in the moment, you're impulsive, you're emotional, you're horny, and now you're willing to take more risk. So again, in the hallways at Humber, being asked this question, you are in a cold state. You are just being like rational and clear-minded and straightforward. And you predict what's good to do. But then in the moment, when you are with a potential sexual partner and you're feeling lust and whatnot, and you're emotional and so on and so forth, you're impulsive, now you're in a hot state, and now you might be more willing to engage in this behavior. So that's another example of the gap between cold states and hot states, where it's hard for us to predict how we ourselves will act in certain states. So this is another example of that. When you read the article, you'll see that there's actually quite a few things that people think will make them happy, but are wrong about. So even something like having children, people will often talk about having children as something that will make them happy, but research suggests it actually makes you less happy to have children. As an aside to this, though, I would just point out that we might want to think about in our life that happiness isn't the end all be all. We might want to contrast something like happiness versus like meaning. Like having children is very meaningful, even if it doesn't actually make us happier, or like in that sense. So just keep that in mind, that here we're talking about pleasure and happiness, but sometimes we want to think of life as something that's greater than just how it's going to make us feel. But I'll put that to the side for now. Are there any things that we do in life that are not aimless or meaningless, or that we don't always get so wrong? Yes. One of them could be something like a flow state. A flow state, something that like it's very different for all of us, but something that we get very absorbed into and like lose time, and it's very stimulating and whatnot. So for some of you, it might be sports, like when you're playing cricket or soccer or basketball, and you're using your body and your mind, and you're like lose time, and you're so engaging, and you could just do it for hours and hours. For some of you, it might be art, playing music, playing video games, whatever. So when you achieve a flow state, I mean, that's one thing that they talk about is like not being futile. But important for our purposes that I really want you to remember for the final test is human relationships. And the claim is that when it comes to positive human relationships, right? So good friends or good partners or good family, humans, all of us, are constantly evolving, changing, deciding different things. And the reality is that we never fully adapt to other people. So remember my example of like, I had laser eye surgery and then I just got used to it. In other words, I adapted. Or, I got the great job, but then I got used to it. And I guess the idea is that humans in principle is something, other people is in principle something that we just don't get used to, as long as we put in the requisite effort, right? And they'll talk about this is true even of our close intimates, our friends, our family, our lovers, but also even just strangers, even just someone you might meet at a coffee shop or on the bus, or like a quick little engagement on the subway or something. These things seem insignificant, but any type of human interaction does have this positive effect on our overall sense of well-being. And so just keep this in mind, that we never fully adapt to other people. And so other people are in some sense something that we should really be investing a lot of our time and energy in. So if you think about your life, I'm going to, go off and make all this money. But remember, as we saw with Epicurus, right, we get used to when we have too much money, we get used to it, and it no longer gives us the same level of pleasure. But rather than focus on all these other things, if you focus on human relationships, it's something that the rewards will come back to you, and you won't ever really get used to it. Which is why, some of you could talk about, I have had the same best friend for 10 years or for 15 years, or I've been married for 20 years. And, it's, obviously ups and downs, but I'm not used to it in the sense that, it's boring, right? It's still stimulating. It's still so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of a way to end it kind of positively, this whole article, which is interesting. Okay, final test. Same format as the previous two tests, worth the same amount of money, worth the same amount of marks, and it's on 5 articles. So right before test 2, we did climate change, then globalization, and that was the end of our 3rd unit on like forces in the world. Both of those have PowerPoints. Then we did an Epicurus and the 3 parts of happiness. Then we did romantic love last week, and then today we're doing the futile pursuit. So those are the 5 articles, and the futile pursuit, you have a PowerPoint here, but romantic love and Epicurus, I use the whiteboard, so you need to get the notes if you don't have them. But it's those 5 that are on the test. And that's all we're doing that day. So you just come and you write it, and then once you finish, the course is over. And that's it for me. I really hope this recording worked. I'll see you all very soon.